message. The future is not set.
All right, my name is Allison Zagrodnik. My talk today is, has the cybersecurity industry grown to accept GRC? I'm a senior information security analyst in GRC at Century Insurance. They are headquartered in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, but we do have a larger office in Middleton where I work. Quick agenda. We will do a quick intro about myself. I'll talk about my career background, what motivated me to give this talk today, the survey I put together, those results, and then we'll do a little Q&A. All right, so who am I? As I mentioned, I'm a senior information security analyst. You can see the photo up there. That's our headquarters in Stevens Point. I have had many cybersecurity and GRC roles. I started off at Summit Credit Union with an internship that led to a spot on their security team and really gave me my foot in the door to this industry. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Winona State. I also have my associates in cybersecurity from MATC, which is Madison Area Technical College. As Joe mentioned, I am a dog and cat mom. You can see Fig, Fern, and Forest on there. I co-founded DC 608 this July. Will be our 3-year anniversary of existing, and we are just 1 year into being a nonprofit. I'm a huge sports fan. In the upper corner there, that's Lambeau Field. I spent my birthday there this last year. My dad coached sports here in Milwaukee, so I grew up on a football field, so it's a place I really love to be. And then boating and biking is what I do in my free time. In Madison, we are an isthmus, so we have a body of land surrounded by lots of lakes. So we get out on the water as much as we can, and then it's also a huge biking community. You can get anywhere by bike, so that's what we do in our free time. So my journey to cybersecurity, 10 years ago, I had no idea that this is where I would be. My boyfriend, now husband, Ryan, has been in the industry for many years, and I started attending conferences socially. So my first one was DerbyCon in Louisville, Kentucky. I got introduced to biohacking. I had no idea that you could hack pacemakers or medical devices. I got introduced to LobbyCon, so I went to this conference just to go explore the city. I didn't have a ticket. While Ryan was at the conference, I got to meet people in the industry just sitting at the lobby bar and talking. I got to meet Dave Kennedy, who now owns Trusted Second Binary Defense. I got to meet Jason Street, who's a well-known social engineer. So I was getting to be socially connected into this industry and had no idea I could make a career out of it. When we were there, Ryan was in the class, and Carlos Perez, I have the tweet up there, he had a challenge coin, and I decided to solve it. I found a spelling mistake, or so I thought, and so I thought the best way to ask Carlos was, well, why don't I tweet at him? And Ryan's like, you really want to call him out publicly? And I was like, well, I guess. I don't know how else I'm going to reach him. He did tweet back and did say, yes, you found the spelling mistake, which now made that challenge coin even more rare. I quickly learned that you can talk to bigger people in the industry and they will respond. So I was getting my social footing. Carlos Perez is now a director for Trusted Sec, so it was really cool to meet him back in the day. DEF CON, I started attending that many years ago. I think I've been to 6 or 7 DEF CONs now. That was my first exposure to the social engineering village, and with my psychology background, it felt like it was like the perfect place for me to be. So I got to meet Rachel Toback and see the cool stuff that they do there. I'm sure you've all seen the crying baby video in school or someplace else. So that sucked me in. I spent many hours in the social engineering village. And then I also was exposed to Sky Talks, which sadly don't exist anymore. But at DEF CON, you would stand in terribly long lines, and you would get to go into a talk where no recording was allowed. A lot of times it was like sensitive information, and you and 30 other people in the room were getting to hear something really cool that no one on the outside was going to. So I was really getting excited. We had a local group called MadSec. I would attend that meetup. At that time, I was working in veterinary medicine, so I was trying to find ways to talk about my daily job, but relate it to tech. Turns out in vet medicine, all the equipment you use for doing dentals, x-rays, monitoring are all just human equipment used on the animals, so I could find a way to intertwine the industries. And then, of course, Darknet Diaries. Once I got sucked into that and just learned that this industry is not small and you can come from any background, that really got me into it. COVID really allowed me to make my transition into cybersecurity. I was working 6 days a week in vet medicine, being burnt out, making $16 an hour, and I was living paycheck to paycheck, and I just couldn't do that anymore. Because of COVID, MATC in town did online classes and night classes, so I could keep my full-time job and then go to school. I could not afford to not work, so it was perfect. I attended MATC from 2021 to 2023. Getting my foot in the door. So I applied for an internship in between my first and second year. I was randomly trolling the internet one day and came across Summit Credit Union. I applied and went through many interviews. I did get the job, but it was one of the most uncomfortable interview processes I've ever had. My interview was with a hiring manager named Brian. He's now one of the smartest people I've ever met, but we had a Teams meeting, and when I came to the interview, he insisted his camera didn't work, but I had to stay on camera. So I just stared at a picture of his white floofy cat, and he could read my body language and how I was reacting, but I had no insight into how he was. One of the questions he asked me at the end was, if you were to build a computer, would you use NVIDIA, AMD? And I had no idea. Like, prior to being in school, I had never even seen a command prompt. I didn't know what Linux was. So I straight up told him, I was like, I honestly don't know. I've never built a computer, but I'll go look. The interview ended not much longer after that. I remember running downstairs to Ryan, and I was like, this guy thinks I'm a frickin' idiot. I'm never going to get into the industry. I don't know what's going to happen. It wasn't even 15 minutes later, I got an email saying, congrats, you got the internship. That was a huge turning point in my career. That foot in the door is definitely what allowed me to be where I am now. 2 months into my internship, there was someone on our team that was moving on to a position somewhere else, and I was encouraged to apply for the security team. I didn't think I would get it. I still had a whole nother year in school. Would Summit really let me, still go to school and work for them full time? Turns out they were really cool with that. So I had a decision to make. I could move on to the security team, make in the mid-50,000s, or Brian said he could go to the CISO and try to get me a spot on his operations team. The CISO said no, but offered to keep me on as an intern at $16 an hour. Brian is probably the most educated and smart person I've ever met. If I would have taken that job, I think I would be like a Linux guru somewhere right now. My career path would be completely different. I wish I could have worked for him, but financially it was not something I could do. But he gave me the best advice that day. On the security team, our manager at the time was pretty non-existent, and it was nice to have a manager not breathing down my neck, but if you asked him what I did every day, he could not tell you that. But Brian said, you will never have a manager that is tailored to you. So yes, you could work under me, and I'm a great manager, but you could work under him, and maybe you can teach him to be a better manager. So I took that advice, went on to the security team, and again, that was a big pivotal moment in my career. So why GRC? This was never my plan. I honestly didn't even know it existed. I didn't learn about it in school. Shameless plug, MATC in Madison is starting the first GRC program this fall. I do get to be on the advisory committee for that, but GRC is making a comeback in the industry. They're finding those that can't get their foot in the door in cybersecurity tend to then take jobs in GRC. So MATC is starting the first program of that kind in the state. But in the meantime, I was on the security team, mostly doing a lot of IAM work, very manual IAM work. I got to get my hands dirty in Splunk a little bit. We were having some fraud investigations, so it was kind of cool. One day, the VP came to me and grabbed another teammate in a different area and took me into the CISO's office and said, hey, she's about to be out on maternity leave. We didn't get a contractor for her, so you need to learn her job in the next 3 weeks. And you'll be doing her job and your job until she comes back. I, again, had no idea what GRC was. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to learn her job, and then she was gone. So for the next 4-ish months, I did her GRC job on top of my security job. And then one day, Ryan was posting in our local Discord, like, about a job at Sentry and GRC. I was like, Ryan, what are you doing? Like, I should apply to that. Don't let other people go and apply for this. So I put my resume out there. It was a 51% pay increase. It was going to be life-changing. The only downside is my interview process was 7.5 weeks. They ended up having some change in management, but did not make that clear to me. So it was really drawn out. I never thought I would get it, but I did. And when I look back at this, did it suck having to learn GRC or Summit's version of GRC in 3 weeks and do 2 people's job? Yes, but now when I look at where I am now, it definitely, made my career what it is. And I have such a good outlook. Like, moments you might struggle, but you'll come out better on the other end, and I have. So my motivation for this talk, first is imposter syndrome. Like I said, this is not my first career choice. I didn't grow up, tinkering in a basement. Like, yes, I grew up with technology, but it was never a passion. And so I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. I come to these conferences, I've been part of it socially for 15 years, but I don't have, like, the experiences of being in my mom's basement or building computers or, any of that. And so I do sometimes feel like, maybe I don't fit in the same. Second reason for this is treatment within the industry. I didn't know that GRC had such a negative, outlook in the industry. I found myself at DEF CON last year at a resume clinic. I wasn't looking for a job, but I was like, hey, take a look, see what you think. And I found as people asked me, what do you do in the industry? I didn't just come out and say GRC. I was trying to find flashy words like, I do risk management or, third-party incident response, because I have this stigma of, like, if I say GRC, they're instantly not going to look at me and they're going to think these words I have up here. GRC is not security, it's security theater. You're not technical, you're irrelevant. And I'm kind of getting sick of not being proud of what I do, so that was a motivator to this. Next is social media. You'll see these 2 screenshots. They come from our DC 608 Discord. Ew, GRC is gross. There's ChatGPT saying, GRC is irrelevant. Like, it's everywhere. LinkedIn is probably the worst environment for me. GRC is just talked so poorly of in there. And so as I'm seeing all these things in my daily life, it made me curious, like, is GRC really thought of that poorly? Do my peers that I connect with all the time really think that, I'm not technical and, that GRC is irrelevant? And then lastly, lack of GRC representation. I've been going to these conferences for 10 years. I don't really see GRC-related content. And last year, I attended Blue Team Con for the first time. Super excited to be like, all right, this has to have some GRC content. Now, the attendees were GRC. It was the first time I was in a place at LobbyCon and meeting people that do what I do, and we could openly talk about it and not feel, the social pressure of being in GRC. When I went to the content still wasn't super GRC heavy. Therefore, I wanted to bring this talk here. All right, so I put together a survey. My goal was to get as many people in IT and InfoSec as I could with a wide range of experiences and titles. So I wanted those who were newer industry and those who have been around for years and years. I wanted it to be short and easy to answer. I know people don't like to be inconvenienced, but I also wanted to collect important information. Our IT department at Sentry gave me feedback that they had been using surveys through Microsoft Forms and thought it was fantastic. So if I was to do something, they really encouraged Microsoft Forms. I wanted to make sure that it was anonymous. I wanted to allow for many types of questions to be asked. So it was super easy for me to ask a question with select all or select two or rate on a scale, and Microsoft Forms allowed for that. And then also, it created graphs throughout the process for me, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time at the end of this trying to compile data. It did it for me. I tried to get the survey to as many people as possible. You can see over here, a lot of you probably saw me posting on LinkedIn about this, trying to reach as many people as I could. I was posting in Discord. I know my husband was sending it to other Discords. I probably spammed some of you on LinkedIn. I can see some of your faces. I sent direct messages like, hey, I'm giving a talk, doing some research. Can you please answer this? So I tried to reach as many as possible. Those connections in the industry became very important. And then the CSO at Sentry let me send the survey to a small subset of people, so that was super helpful to reach people in the industry directly through my job. I did have some expectations coming into this. You can probably assume that from my motivation, but I was expecting negative responses, negative outlook on GRC. I also thought that maybe upper management would have a positive outlook on GRC, and that those that are, more boots on the ground doing the work every day would not like us. So we will go into the questions. I'm going to move my computer so I can read it better. All right, so my first question was, how familiar are you with information security governance, risk, and compliance? It turns out that most people are extremely familiar with it. I wasn't expecting that. A lot of them say that they work directly with the GRC team, or somewhat familiar where they occasionally worked with them. That was not something I was expecting. In your current role, do you interact with information security GRC processes? Again, the majority said yes frequently, or yes occasionally. Only a few said rarely, not at all, or unsure. So coming into this, already the first questions were kind of going against what I thought. We got into which of the following GRC components are most relevant to your role. Looks like there's a pretty good layout between everything. Some people are doing risk management and assessments. Some are involved in policies and controls, or audit and internal governance, third-party risk management, or compliance with regulations and frameworks. So it was interesting to see that not any specific one was super heavy, but that we were seeing representation across all of that. This one was quite shocking too. How effective is your organization's GRC program in managing IT and IS risks and ensuring compliance? I did not think people thought as highly of their programs, but they do. The most were rating themselves a 7 out of 10. Again, not what I was expecting. What is the biggest challenge you face with information security GRC in your organization? Number one, which I suspected, lack of awareness or understanding among employees. I think it's really difficult, especially the larger a company you're at, to spread the word and help people understand what GRC is and what their function is. A lot of people come to a job and you're used to just saying accept all to your policies, and I'm sure half of you don't read your policies or standards, but again, that's all GRC. A lot of people thought GRC processes slow down operations, or they have insufficient tools or resources to support their GRC initiatives. So I also thought it was interesting that we had lack of executive support or prioritization. Again, coming into this, I thought that management and director level would have a better outlook on GRC and understand the importance. So to see that a lot of the feedback was that lack of executive support, I was not expecting that. If given the option, how would you prefer to engage with information security? Super surprising to me that people said engage but advocate for improvements. I did not think people wanted to engage with GRC. I thought they'd want to avoid us completely, which there are a few that said they would avoid us entirely or minimize interaction if possible. But again, 75% said, we want to work with you, we just need something better. How well does your organization integrate GRC with IT and security operations? Again, people spoke and said very highly well things about their company, like, there is collaboration, but it could be better, or very well, it's embedded in our workflows. Also not something I was expecting. And then how long have you worked in IT and information security? I was surprised at how many people, I know the box is there, but it says 15 plus years. I had about half of the people that answered this survey have been in the industry for a very long time. But I do think there was good representation across, 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and I think by luck it worked out this way. I did not pursue certain, the amount of time that you've been in the industry. It kind of just worked out this way. What is your current role level? I also think there was a pretty good representation across this. We had technician and analyst, senior engineer, specialist, manager, and director and above. I think it showed well across all of that. What is the size of your organization? I was actually shocked at how many people did 5,000 plus employees, but there was a good representation here as well, on the size of the organization. And then lastly, I asked, what industry does your organization operate in? Most are finance or technology. We did have a good amount of others. Those, if they chose to fill in, said they worked in arts. So I'm not sure if that means, I'm working in the theater and making sure the lights and things work like that. We also had transportation, specifically like airline transportation and things like that also answered this survey. I had an interesting finding. So with those questions we just went over, I started to correlate the data. So one of the questions we asked was, how effective is your organization at managing its risks and ensuring compliance? And they gave that score 1 to 10. We also had that question asking, like, how would you prefer to engage with GRC? 17 of the 73 that answered my survey were director or above. They all scored their program pretty well, 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10. But it looks like 2 would avoid GRC entirely, or the other 2 would minimize interaction when possible. I was not expecting this from director level. I was expecting more buy-in from that level. Same kind of thing I saw with management. 14 were managers, 2 were unsure how they'd engage. One person, whether they scored their program this low because their GRC is not great, but he or she said they would avoid them entirely. Another said minimize with possible. What was interesting when I'm looking at this, the less experience someone had in the industry, they didn't speak poorly about GRC. I'm seeing the negative results that I had come from director and management. Definitely not something I was expecting with this survey. So what would I change? I really wish I could have a larger sample size. I am just one person. My survey was out there for 20 days. I tried to reach as many people as possible, but I can only reach so many. So I would be interested to see if I had a larger population, I would still see these trends. Secondly, I wish I distinguished between IT and InfoSec. I do still believe that those that work in InfoSec, they are more closely tied to GRC. They probably have a little bit more of a positive outlook. If I could deviate between IT and InfoSec, I would really like to see, if their perception of GRC is different, like I assume it is. And then lastly, I would have liked to know the size of the GRC department. I think when you're at a bigger company and have the funding and support to have a larger GRC team, things run smoother. You can get things, from start to finish. You can, just be a better oiled machine, where if you are at a company where they have 2 people in GRC, you're going to have 2 people writing your policies and standards or doing security exceptions or going out and doing your risk management. That seems to be very difficult for 2 people. So I do think size of your GRC department might also play a role into your perception of GRC. And that is what I have. So my LinkedIn is up here. Social Engineer Lady is my handle on all sorts of things. I'm not super active on Twitter, but it is under that. Otherwise, my Discord is there. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yep. Yeah, so it was completely voluntary. So I just sent the link. I could see with Microsoft Forms, every time someone answered the survey, I would get an email that said, hey, GRC response. And I could look at that moment at the graphs and see it, but it was completely voluntary. It showed me about people took like 3 minutes to answer the survey, but I did not have any requirements. It was just, please do this. I'm giving a talk. I would love to gather some information. Yeah, so I'm fortunate to work in a department where our GRC is 20 people. We have a huge compliance, privacy, and risk team. We are able to break ourselves off into that. I actually did show the results of this in one of our sprint kickoffs the other week. Just as, a lot of people didn't even know I was speaking. I was like, I want you to see what I'm working on. Some of the feedback was instantly, well, what does IT think? And beyond that, I know when we have our retrospectives and we look internally, some people do not have the cybersecurity background, and I do think that plays a role in GRC. You know, how can you be writing policies and standards or doing security exceptions if you don't know how cybersecurity works? And so I do think we do have to look at ourselves. I think we do need to educate and be up with technology. You have to be looking at, you know, bleeping computer and things online. You have to be educating yourself. So I do think there's that portion to it. I also think just being, I guess, more educational about GRC. I think if I went to an area and said, hey, here's why we do what we do or what we request, that's also a pain point. You know, I can't be hitting up your team 4 times a year asking for evidence on things when you're like, oh my gosh, I just did that 2 months ago for PCI, and now you're asking for this attestation because you want to get an ISO cert. Like, so I know we have to do better. We are trying to build, in our environment at least, one platform to reference and say, hey, we have this piece of evidence in here. Oh, look, it you know, gives us the evidence we need for PCI, ISO, NIST. So we on our end need to be better educators and organized on our end so we don't reach out and burden the other teams. Anything else? Mm-hmm. How would you measure a very mature program? Delivery value that I think I would measure maturity maybe on a level of acceptance within your program. I mean, it depends on your level, right? Like where I came from, I didn't have any insight into security exceptions. We may or may not have been asking even security-related questions to our third parties, right? So I think maturity or how you think of your program should be based on, you know, covering all those bases. Now, I think maybe they were basing it on, well, they seem to be doing a good job, so I'm going to say they're doing a good job, or maybe they're not bothering me, so they must be doing a good job. But I would think is if you're covering your bases, doing well with your policies and standards, your exceptions, your third-party risk management. Yeah, and I think reducing risk is different for every team. You know, when I look at our security exceptions versus like when I do third-party risk management and I send, you know, if we're using, I'll say Google, right? If I'm doing a security assessment on Google, you know, we have a different risk tolerance for using Google than we do for our own internal security exceptions. So I do think end goal should be reducing risk. Now, you have to consider that for each area because it is different in what your risk tolerance is, but I do agree it should be, you know, how well are you reducing risk for your organization? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a perception that GRC is kind of called out in your slides as a checkbox or underlying like insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you combat that to the full step kind of view GRC as an obstacle that's there to check a box or insurance?
It's a hard answer. I think I have to find a way to get that into words because I've seen 2 different GRC programs that were like drastically different. One, we were just looking, do they have a SOC report? Okay, cool, that's it, and weren't ever communicating. Where I am now, you know, I am doing research online. I'm sending them a dynamic questionnaire. I built a whole section on AI questions. I'm asking about, you know, CSP questions, access control. You know, we built this. And so to get people to understand how much effort we actually put in. You know, I'm meeting with the cybersecurity teams at all of our third parties. You know, we have 1,600 third parties that I'm managing. I know we're doing a good job, but how to portray that to others, and maybe it is just, not that people love LinkedIn Learnings, but maybe we put together a LinkedIn Learning that gets sent out to our company. They can understand what GRC is doing, because there are times like we won't use high-risk vendors. I've had to say no, or go up to management and say, hey, if you really want this vendor, it is too risky. I'm not comfortable with it. If you really want to take on that risk, you need to like wet signature this because I won't. So getting people to understand exactly how much goes in behind the scenes might make them more comfortable with GRC.
Do you have evidence from the GRC side of the house to say, because we did this, we didn't end up in this situation?
Yeah, so there was it was not long into me working there. There was a supplier we were working with that was not encrypting emails to us, and we had it in our security questionnaire that they said they were. Now, people know the right answers in the security assessment. You could totally be BSing, right? If you have third-party attestation like a SOC report or high trust, that gives you more confidence that, a third party looked in and what you're doing or you say you're doing, you're actually doing. I also am in charge of the data security language in our contracts. So when they answer the security assessment that way, and then they answered or they signed our contract where I make sure you're encrypting and doing all these things, they came back to us and said like, oh, we never said that, or, and we had it in our contract. So that is one instance where it has come back and been like, we did our due diligence, we have our evidence because of that. We are requiring them to, at that point, we would have loved TLS 1.3, that we were comfortable with 1.2, but, that was one of the first times where it was like my job directly impacted the business, and, we were able to get to a consensus on it. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys coming. This is my first time speaking, so I love the support. It's a little miracle that I'm here today. I've been sick for the last week and a half. I found out that my gallbladder needs to be taken out, so I'm on a bunch of meds just to be here today and tomorrow. So I appreciate you guys coming and listening, and thank you.
You